Hello, everybody. Just hang on one second. No, you gotta stay in or stay out. Okay. Just a bit of business before we begin covering the two cases we're going to cover today. I still don't know when the final exam is, the third test. Has anyone seen? Has that been released yet? Does anyone know? I looked today and I couldn't find it, so it seems awfully late. We're almost to exam period. You'd think that they would know by now when the exams are. At any rate, as soon as I know, I'll let you know. I still have some people questioning the final assignment. So it's an either or. You either do the essay assignment. That's on the Michaela Salt case. It's on the web page, on the Moodle page. Go on. Doggy's sitting today, so there's a little puppy in the house who wants to come in and out. And I've got somebody working in the house too, so a few disruptions perhaps. Yeah, so where was I? Yeah, okay, the exam timetable, I'll let you know when I know. Oh, yes. So you either do the essay assignment on the Michaela Salt case, or you write the final test. And the final test, if you choose to do that rather than the essay assignment, it'll have the exact same structure as your previous two tests. It's just going to be held in the final exam period. So it's designed to be an hour and a half long. I'll give you the same amount of time I gave you in the last test. I don't know what that was, 2.5 hours maybe. It'll have a section where you do 3 out of, say, 5 or 6 or 7 short answers. And then I'll give you study questions, and 3 or 4 of those, and 2 of them will be on the test, and you'll have to answer 1 of them in that essay of page and a half, 2 pages typed. So there is an essay question on the final test, just like there were in the first 2, but that's not the essay assignment. The essay assignment is a research assignment, and it's covering the Michaela Salt case. So you have to go and do some research to find out what that case is, and so on and so forth. So it's again, either or. You write the essay assignment or you write the final test. Does anyone have questions? Is anyone still unclear about that? Okay, other business. I couldn't get the guest speaker, Duma Young, in on today, or, well, any other day, but tomorrow. So as I indicated that I thought might be the case, he's going to give his lecture tomorrow from 2:30 to 3:30. And for those who can come, please do. I will do my best to record that lecture and post it on YouTube. And so for those of you who can't make it tomorrow, you will still have access to it. Because we're having a class tomorrow, we are not going to have a class on Friday. So no class this Friday. So after today, we're going to meet tomorrow, and then we'll meet again a week from today. And we're going to cover some material starting on that day that I just added, and that's on punishment. So I think there's 3, maybe 4 cases on punishment. And we'll cover those cases next Wednesday and Friday, and then we're finished. So we'll finish up a week from this Friday. Any questions about that?
Have you posted which cases are being added?
I know there's a case, RV Crew, Proulx. You see that on your, I think I had at least 3 cases. Do you have access to the webpage, Moodle page right now?
Is it Kindler, Prolixon,
That's
Solve?
it. That's it.
Okay, thank you.
Those 3 cases. That's what we'll cover next week. Okay.
Hello,
Yes?
how are you today? I'm Sanchita speaking.
Yes. Hi. How are you, Sanchita?
I'm good. I just have a question, like tomorrow's class is compulsory or not?
Um, no class is compulsory. You know, you're free to come or not. And you can either come to tomorrow's class, or you can listen to the lecture on YouTube, the same as any other class. But like any other class, you're free to come or not. If you're asking me, will there be a way to avoid any answering any questions on it in the exam? Yes, there will. You can avoid it, but that's true of any class. So it's. I guess the short answer is it's not compulsory. Is that clear enough?
Thank you so much. Yes, thank you.
Okay, great. Anything else?
We can just watch the YouTube video, correct?
Correct.
Okay, because I think I have a class during that time.
Yeah,
and-
I know. Absolutely. I understand that. People have other classes at that time. They might have other commitments, either work or just they plan something else. So I understand that, you know, I won't have a full class there. I certainly hope some people show up. So he's not speaking just to me, but yes, I understand that it's an unusual circumstance to hold a class outside of regular class time.
What is your channel called?
I had no idea. I don't know if it has a name. I've just been sending out links when I've got something that I've recorded. I've sent out a link to it to the class.
Like just through like email?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Okay.
Excellent. Thank you.
Anything else? Okay, let's start then by looking at the cases for today. Okay, there we go. So the first case we're going to look at is a case from 2014. And I will, I apologize in advance of my bad pronunciation, but Silhouquipin Nation versus BC. So here the background is that the government in British Columbia granted a license to a company to clear cut wood. Clear cutting is just where it's not particularly germane to the point. Well, not directly relevant. When you cut wood from a piece of land, you can either do it by selectively cutting some and leaving some old growth trees there and replanting, or you can just cut the whole thing down, and if you replant or not, and to cut the whole thing down is clear cutting. So that's what they gave a license to do on this land that was traditionally held by this particular First Nation. And the Silhouquipin Nation objected to it, saying, well, this is our land, we've got Aboriginal title to it, and you can't do that without our permission, or at least adequate consultation, so on and so forth, as we'll talk about later. The case took a long time to go through the courts, and it was appealed several times, and the initial court and then the Court of Appeals in British Columbia held that the British Columbia government did not do anything wrong in the case, that they did not violate this First Nation's Aboriginal rights to this particular piece of land by saying somebody could clear cut lumber on it. ultimately, the Supreme Court of Canada will disagree with that. And it's Chief Justice McLaughlin. We've seen her before write for the majority as she does so here. So she starts out by talking about what sufficiency of occupation means. What do you need to show or demonstrate that will be sufficient justification for saying that you've occupied the land? Well, too often, and they claim that this is what happened in the lower courts decisions, they didn't take into sufficient account the Aboriginal perspective on law. They were just looking at common law perspective, which is to say European or settler law perspectives, and discounted too much the Aboriginal perspective on it. So common law is if you've got possession and control of the land. And typically in this Western English common law tradition, as a philosopher in the 18th century, John Locke said, you come to own land by mixing your labor with it. So from a European perspective, when European settlers first came to the New World, as they termed it, so they came to, let's say, British North America, as it was at the time, and started doing something like fencing in property or farming it or something like that, that was, as they saw it, to mix their labor with it and therefore to own it. That's a quite different perspective on the land that First Nations peoples had from it. I mean, and I think Duma will talk to some extent about this in his lecture tomorrow, that it's even this notion of ownership, as Europeans see it, is actually a bit foreign to the Aboriginal point of view. Now, that complicates things because they'll say they own it in the sense that they have the right to use it as they see fit, and so they have the right to refuse certain kinds of government or private industry action on it. But that ownership of land is a particularly, according to them, non-Indigenous, non-Aboriginal, non-First Nations perspective on things. But anyway, so when Europeans came to North America, they saw, from their perspective, nobody was mixing their labor with the land. And so it was free to take. And that's the perspective they had. Although, of course, they did end up signing treaties and so on with First Nations peoples to use particular kinds of lands. The reason for that was not so much a philosophical issue as a practical one. That is that when Europeans first settled, and for quite a while afterwards, when they first settled North America, First Nations peoples outnumbered European settlers and were therefore quite a threat physically to Europeans, just as Europeans were also a threat to First Nations peoples. So treaties were signed just as they are when any two nations are at odds with one another and in a state of war of some sort. So at any rate, I guess I'm getting a little off track here. But the idea is that Aboriginals and European settlers had a different idea about what ownership or occupation of a land is. You have to remember too that most of the First Nations of North America were not farmers. They were tended to be more nomadic or semi-nomadic. So, for example, the Mi'kmaq in Nova Scotia would move a boat from one place to another at different times of the year, given where certain kinds of fish were, certain kinds of animals were, or certain kinds of foraging could happen. So there's to this day a fairly significant portion of Mi'kmaq who travel to parts of Maine to harvest blueberries at a certain time of year. So that's to say that they were kind of semi-nomadic, moved around in order to hunt and gather. So they didn't possess and control the land as in the sense that European settlers did, but so that's why we have to take, according to Chief Justice McLachlin, why we have to take into account an Aboriginal perspective on this. And to take that Aboriginal perspective into account, you have to look at the group's size, what kind of life they lived, like nomadic, semi-nomadic, what kind of material resources they had, what kinds of technological abilities they had, the character of the land, and so on. So from those points of view, when you look at this particular land that's in question here, it's a harsh environment. It's not suitable for farming, even if they were farmers, which they weren't. And it will support very, very few people, despite its, I can't remember what size it is, but it's harsh land that will support only between 100 and 1,000 people. In this particular First Nation, numbers 400. So they would use the land in a different way than Europeans might use the land. And as McLachlin says, a culturally sensitive approach suggests the regular use of territories for hunting, fishing, trapping, and foraging is sufficient use to grant Aboriginal title. So as long as they were doing these things like hunting, fishing, trapping, foraging, and so on, that shows that from an Aboriginal perspective that they had title to the land. Another aspect of it, so that aspect of it was occupation of the land. And continuing on with that, does a piece of land have to be kind of this unbroken chain from pre-contact to the present in order for a particular nation to say that they had, First Nation to say that they had title to the land? No, but it does mean that there have to be significant periods of time where the First Nations did use that land in the sense that we talked about before, foraging, hunting, fishing, so on. And that they've done so since pre-sovereignty, since I wonder if that's supposed to be pre-contact. My notes might be wrong there. I think that should be, instead of pre-sovereignty there, pre-contact. Most of the Aboriginal rights get traced back to pre-contact at some point in time. So there also has to be an exclusivity of occupation. So that means that the Aboriginal group must have had the intention and capacity to remain exclusive control. So this land was not only your land versus somebody else's land to use, but the other groups knew that. Now, it might be that you gave them access to the land for whatever sorts of reasons you might have done that. But if they did use the land, your land, the land that was under your control, then, for example, they had to ask permission. So, so again, McLaughlin saying we have to take this all into account as well as the common law approach. And this, I guess, is going back to some of the points I was making earlier about the difference between how First Nations view the land and how European settlers have typically viewed the land. And this brings up the notion of fee simple. You can go Google that if you want to get a good sense of, or better sense of what that means. But it basically, if you think about the kind of title that you have to a house if you buy a house. So you own the building structure, but you also own the land on which the house is built. And it's yours to use as you see fit. I mean, there will be some restrictions on that. You could have municipal laws that say you can't burn, blah, 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 you can't, but the general idea is you can do with what your house and the land it sits on in a way that you wish. And there's no, you can pass this on to your children, to your heirs, and there's no set limit. Like, you don't get use of this house and land for 100 years and then it reverts to somebody else or to the crown or anything. It belongs to you in perpetuity, as it were, unless, of course, you sell it or something along those lines. So that's a European perspective on at least one kind of ownership, a fee simple ownership. An Aboriginal title doesn't confer ownership in quite this way. It talks more about how you're going to use the land, how you're going to enjoy it, and how you're going to manage it, and so on and so forth. One important difference here is if I own my house, actually my wife and I own it jointly, that's not the community within which we live that owns it jointly. We own it as individuals or as a couple, and that's not the way in which First Nations view ownership of land. They view it as a collective ownership. So this particular First Nation owns this tract of land as a collective, and not just as a collective now, but a collective into the future, so that you're not to do anything with the land that's going to jeopardize its future use. Again, and what's that use? Again, for a nomadic or semi-nomadic nation, as this one is, it means hunting, fishing, foraging, and so on. So clear cutting the land, the trees on the land might well make it much less possible, or indeed impossible, for you to use the land as you have now and maybe even into the future. So if the government wants to use the land in some way, or to allow somebody else to do something with the land, then they must seek the consent from the First Nation to do so. And if that consent is not granted, the only way the government can use the land is consistent with Section 5 of the Constitution. And that requires three things: that you've got to carry out consultation and accommodation, you've got to have a substantive and compelling objective in using this land, and it's got to be consistent with your fiduciary obligation to the Aboriginal body or nation in question. Remember, we talked about fiduciary relationships before as something that you're to have the best interests of somebody else in mind when you do something. So a typical fiduciary relationship is the one between a parent and their child. So you have all kinds of fiduciary obligations to do what's best for your, in the best interests of your children. As it turns out, the Supreme Court thought that the government hadn't achieved any one of these three things. They hadn't adequately consulted, they hadn't adequately accommodated. The reason that the objective here to clear cut land to make some money for a logging company was not a compelling and substantial enough objective to override the title that the First Nation had to the land. And in that sense, then, because it disadvantages or makes it impossible for the land to be used as it's traditionally been done by clear cutting the lumber, then that's inconsistent with the Crown's fiduciary obligation to this First Nation. So it's as a result of this case, as a landmark decision, that provinces cannot claim a right to engage in clear-cut logging on grounds protected by Aboriginal title and must gain approval. So, and we see similar things going on over issues like pipelines. So they're trying to build a pipeline, let's say from the tar sands in Alberta to the West Coast. So they have to travel, and the pipelines travel through some land on which various First Nations have title. So that wasn't clear-cut logging they're talking about, but similar kinds of arguments would apply that would require that you either get the consent of the First Nations involved, or you have a substantial and compelling enough reason to infringe upon their treaty rights that's consistent with your fiduciary relationship with them. So that's why there's been so much talk about discussions going on between the Crown and speaking for private companies and First Nations peoples. And that's why you've seen some movement for First Nations to take an active role in ownership or control of these pipelines, or to get adequately compensated for the use of their land. Any questions or comments about that before moving on to the next case? Oh. Okay. Ktullunaqsa Nation versus British Columbia, another case in BC. This is a much more recent case. It's the other one wasn't that old, 2014, I believe. This one is 2017. This one, again, had to do with a use of some land that was occupied or used by a First Nations community. And this is a piece of land that had been used some. It's a pretty remote piece of land. And obviously it's a very mountainous piece of land, and with lots of snow, and it had been used for heli-skiing. That is to say that people with, I guess, a great deal of money could pay to ski the hill by hiring a helicopter and having a helicopter take them to the top of the hill, and then they would ski down it. But obviously that has a very limited appeal to the broader public because of its cost. So a private company wanted to build a permanent ski resort there. And they sought permission from the British Columbia government to approve this building project, and the British Columbia government gave them approval to build the ski resort. The problem from the Ktunaxa point of view is that this was a sacred place for them. It was a place where the spirit of the grizzly bear resided. And they held the belief that not only did the grizzly bear spirit reside there, but that he would leave if the resort was built. So they claim then that the British Columbia government's approval of the ski resort, building of the ski resort, infringed upon their Section 35 rights in the Constitution. That is the one that recognizes Aboriginal and treaty rights, and also Section 2A of the Constitution, which protects some fundamental freedoms, including freedom of religion. And that's what this case is particularly about, or that's the portion of this case that we have on Section 2A of the Constitution on freedom of religion. Again, with respect to 2A, as it says here in the slides, with respect to Section 35, they said they hadn't consulted or accommodated enough, and with respect to 2A, the freedom of religion, they say that was unacceptably infringed by building in territory in this territory. So ultimately, the Supreme Court thinks that the British Columbia government did nothing wrong here. That in particular, the majority argued that their rights, their freedom of religion rights, were not violated. And why is that? Well, again, we've got Chief Justice McLachlin writing, and Justice Rowe writing for the majority. And as was determined in a case we looked at previously, the Big M Drug Mart case, remember that had to do with the Lord's Day Act and whether you could open a business on a Sunday. So freedom of religion has two aspects: the freedom to hold religious beliefs and the freedom to manifest religious beliefs. That is, to display or to somehow make public, to show that you hold these religious beliefs. So in order to prove their case, the Ktunaxa must demonstrate that the belief or practice is religious in some way, and that the proposed conduct or action, the building of the ski resort, interferes with this belief or practice in a non-trivial or insubstantial way. Okay, so that's what this First Nation has to prove, and that's what, according to the Supreme Court, they failed to prove. How come? Well, McLachlin and Rowe make some effort to say that, look, it's not our job to protect the spiritual focal point of the religious belief. Now, what exactly does that mean? Well, from a Christian perspective, if we look at it from that point of view, it's not the role of the government to make sure or to look at the specific nature of, let's say, Christian belief that there's a supernatural being who created the universe, who sent his only son to the earth in the form of a human being, and that son was killed while he was on earth, and he decided to die for our sins, but was resurrected and taken up to heaven after the third day, and so on and so forth. So it's not the government's business to get involved in any of that stuff at all. What the government's interest in is that they protect a person's freedom to hold religious beliefs so that the government can protect a Christian's right to believe in the existence of God and Jesus Christ as his son and so on and so forth. But it makes no claim about what the truth value or rationality or irrationality of those beliefs is. That's your religious belief. That's your business. That's what we're trying to protect here. And we're also trying to protect your freedom to manifest, to display, or show those beliefs in some respect. But it's not to get into the sort of nitty-gritty substantive points of religion. So doing so, and you can see why they're reticent to do so, because they don't want to get involved in a judicial scrutiny of religious beliefs. So, how is the spirit to be protected? How does the court access the content and merits of particular religious beliefs? Is belief in a grizzly bear spirit any more or less worthy than belief in a non-material God, so on and so forth? Again, McLaughlin and Rowe are saying that's not our business. What we're here to do is protect your right to believe in that and to manifest somehow your beliefs in those areas. According to McLaughlin and Rowe, by allowing this ski resort to be built, you have not adversely affected a person's ability to believe in the existence of a grizzly bear spirit, nor does it adversely affect your ability to manifest these beliefs. That gets into into stuff that the freedom of religion that does not, the judicial freedom of religion does not take into account at all. So that goes above and beyond what building. So building a ski resort here does not negatively impact your ability to believe in grizzly bear spirits or to practice your religion that's based upon a belief in this spirit, this particular spirit or other spirits. Justice Moldover agrees overall that the government's actions here were justified, but he disagrees that their religious beliefs weren't negatively affected. So he's going to take the route that their religious freedoms were violated, but that violation was, for some reason that's not discussed in our reading, was okay, I guess, under Section 1 in the Oakes test, I'm gathering. So, while they did consult and accommodate adequately, the majority decision has improperly assessed an infringement of religious freedom. So what exactly is this disagreement? Well, I guess one way to look at it is to see whether or not this particular site and its complete alteration from a wholly sacred site to a privately owned ski resort, does that change or does it sever a connection with the divine, so that the belief that a person from this First Nation would his belief and spiritual fulfillment be undermined by this change in land use? Would it mean that your belief would lack significance, so that you were just sort of going through the motions, as it were, of religious belief, without having it be deeply meaningful. And Moldaver says part of what you have to do here is consider the difference between Aboriginal religious beliefs and Abrahamic religious beliefs. Abrahamic religions are the three religions, Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, that all have a connection to Abraham. All three of the religions claim some sort of genesis from Abraham and his descendants. So that's why they're called the Abrahamic religions. Abrahamic religions typically do not have the connection to land and the view that the land is spiritual. Abrahamic religions don't do that. Notice that, for example, in Abrahamic religions, in Christianity, in Judaism certainly, and I think this is true of Islam as well, that God is this supernatural entity who does not reside in or here in the natural world. So it's not, Christianity is not an animistic religion, where in animistic religions, the tree is filled with spirit, the river is another spirit, and so on and so forth. And spirits like grizzly bears and so on inhabit these grounds, which are themselves spirits. So the land and the animals that populate it are themselves spiritual entities. That's just not a belief that Abrahamic religions have. For those of you in the class who have other religious faiths, like Hinduism, it would be interesting for you to think about the extent to which your belief system is more like the Abrahamic beliefs or the First Nations, indigenous peoples of North America's beliefs, or something different again from either of those two beliefs. But the point here from Moldaver is that in a way, he's suggesting that McLaughlin and Rowe and the majority are looking upon First Nations religious beliefs as if they were pretty darn similar to Europeans' religious beliefs, Christians' religious beliefs, or any of the Abrahamic religious beliefs. And that's just not the case. So that it's certainly possible, according to Moldaver, and more than just possible, it's likely that if an action has negative or deleterious effects on a piece of land that's sacred, this could well have an effect on your ability to believe in that religion in a significant way, and to manifest those beliefs in a significant way. You might take it as an analogy, a rough one. If you're thinking about a church or a mosque or a temple, if your church was destroyed, a Christian might well claim that that infringed his religious beliefs. It made it less able for that Christian to hold his or her religious beliefs and to manifest those beliefs. So if that's true, then it should also be the case that if you destroy sacred land, not just a sacred building like a church or a mosque or a temple, then you could be infringing upon First Nations religious beliefs by destroying land. So that even though he thinks that the government acted properly, that it did adequate consultation and accommodation, whatever exactly that was, we don't know from the snippet we have in our case, that they could go ahead with this, but they should rather recognize that they've infringed upon their Charter 2A right of freedom of religion. Any questions or comments about that? Okay, that's we're finishing early today, earlier than usual even. I've said before that teaching online, one of the big differences between teaching online and in person is that there's virtually no discussion online, or at least that's my experience. I don't know if you had the same experience in other courses or not, but at least from my limited experience, this is my first experience teaching online. I'm going to have to learn to do something next term, because I teach one course next term that's very much based on group work that's done in class. So I'm going to have to figure out how to handle that in an online setting. But at any rate, in this course, as you well know, what typically happens is I come on and speak for an hour and 15 minutes, and that's it. And because there's no class discussion, I'm getting through material much quicker, which is why we tend to finish a little earlier than we should, than the assigned time, and why I had to add some material for next week, which is all fine. You know, the fact is, teaching remotely is different than teaching in person, and there will be some changes in how it goes ahead. So, but at any rate, I am finished for the day, unless you have any questions. Okay, so for those who can make it tomorrow, from 2:30 to 3:30, we're going to have a guest speaker in, Duma Young, and he's going to talk about Aboriginal law, but not in the way we've been looking at it. In a sense, we've been looking at how do Aboriginal rights fit into settler or European law, and how is it accommodated within that. Doom is going to talk instead about what does law mean from an Aboriginal perspective. And so that's what he's going to discuss tomorrow. So I will do my best to record that and post it on YouTube. And when I do, I'll send you a message. Hopefully this lecture is recorded, and I'll get it up on YouTube and send you a message how you can access it. We will not meet next or this Friday, because we're meeting tomorrow. We'll meet twice next week, next Wednesday and Friday, and that will finish up the content of the course, which I think might be a class early. I'm not quite sure. And next week we're going to cover stuff on the nature of punishment. Okay. I'll see some of you tomorrow, and the rest of you I'll see next Wednesday. Take care.
Thank you. Goodbye.
Bye-bye.